Well, so at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the conversations are great as we mark Ghana 60. And we know that there will be formal ceremonies or events at the Independence Square here in Accra. Many of you also have been giving us those interactive messages on our Facebook page where we're streaming live Joy News on TV. And we also have a Twitter handle at Joy News on TV, just in case you want to get onto the conversation. We need to do a lot more introspection because Ghana 60, the African continent, the contemporaries, our peers, etc., we will be better off, definitely. But then the benchmark is not where we want to be. So we decided to have somebody who has great insight into history of Pan-Africanism and the history of Ghana and all the contributions of those in the diaspora in the studio. And we have Dr. Hamet Maulana. Thanks for joining me. A very good morning to you. He's a historian. He's also a lecturer and also a media personality well, he's a diasporan. Lives here in Ghana, and usually you want to, when it was active, the Du Bois Center, you find him there many of the times. And thanks for joining me. A very good morning to you.
Thank you. Thank
you very much. Before we start the conversation, as we mark 60 years of Ghana's independence, Vodafone is giving you 63 minutes to talk on Vodafone Super Hour. From Independence Day till the 31st of March, call other Vodafone numbers for free from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. each day once you get on to the Vodafone Super Hour. So you just have to call 566 to sign up from 6 a.m. and get to make free calls till the close of the next hour, 7 a.m. Super Hour just got more exciting. Just call 566 on Vodafone to enjoy. Terms and conditions apply. Vodafone, power to you. Well, we also have celebrate Ghana's 60th independence with free 60 minutes from Vodafone Super Hour. And when you do all that, you get to have a lot more progress in the usage of the network. Vodafone, power to you. And Dr. Maulana, thanks for joining me. A very good morning to you.
My pleasure.
Now, let's get into the perspectives about Ghana's independence. We know that it was a struggle which culminated in independence from British colonial rule. But it was something that started long way before that, following the struggles of the blacks in America and the counterparts in the Caribbean, etc., to be free of all the shackles of slavery and the dependence on the white man, etc. How do we trace that history if we want to trace ours as a country?
Well, you know, when you talk about the movement toward independence and connections with Pan-Africanism, you know, it goes back. I mean, it goes back far. You see, it goes back hundreds of years ago. But I would say that there always has been one aim, one goal, and one objective, irrespective of where the players are. It's just that Ghana was able enough to leapfrog out front of many of the sub-Saharan African countries, of course, as you know, in 1957. But the essence of the struggle has always been there. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? But, you know, what is important, Roland, I think that when we struggle, and even with Ghana getting their independence, what is important to me is, what is our philosophy? Philosophy to me is the essence, the quintessence of whatever you are trying to accomplish. And I mean, if we ask ourselves today, Ghana is 60, what is the philosophy of Ghana? What is the philosophy of Ghana? I see Ghana, you know, in other words, I'm speaking to you as a Ghanaian. I've been in this struggle, you know, for decades, my brother. And you see what is happening, what our forebears had fought for. If you look at what is happening today, I mean, you would find it almost impossible to see that the forebears who fought, died for freedom, you know what I mean? And you see the young people today taking all of that for granted. You see this new dispensation of democracy, it seems like it has no value. It has no historical perspective in their mind. And so everybody just say, let me do my thing, let me do my thing. But nations are not built and sustained on let me do my thing. And so I think we're really at the crossroads. And I think it also, one must understand, looking at continental Africa, that Ghana has always stood out ahead of the other African countries. So whether you know it or not, the other 53 African countries, there are 54 in the African Union, they are looking at Ghana for direction. And this is extremely important that Ghanaians comport themselves in a leadership role to be the prime example for setting the pace on where continental Africa, and for that matter, the African world is going to go in the 21st century and beyond. And so what we see in Ghana today, if we were, Osai Jeff or Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, if he could see how the young people are carrying on, I think he would turn over in his grave, and say, what the hell is going on? But then again, somewhere along the line, you have to have continuity and sustainability of knowledge of self, knowledge of your struggle. You have to have that inculcated in your curriculum and your educational system. Now, once you take the history and all of the experiences that the forebears have gone through, and you take that out of your educational system, pretty soon the young generation would just start going amok. And this is what's happening right now. And if you don't know, Roland, what it takes is about one generation to erase your genetic memory bank. So whatever has happened with the forebears, however they endeavored, you know what I mean, over the hundreds of years to fight toward freedom, the philosophy behind it, if you don't have the continuity of that, and the young people coming up, it takes less than one generation to erase their genetic memory bank. So I'm saying that to say, if you were to go in the streets and interview the average Ghanaian today and ask them, what does it mean, the struggle for independence? What did it mean for our forebears in their struggle? What were they actually projecting in their struggle for independence? Is it what we have right now? I think the young people today would find it very difficult to explain that. And I felt that really on the lack of continuity in the educational system, as I said before. That is extremely important. The sustainability of education in the schools all the way down to creche up to the PhD level. You must continue to have this awakening, and you must continue to have the philosophy of the forebears on what they had projected, on where they're trying to go. But once you lose that, I'm not saying we've lost it, but I think it's been really, to some degree, it's been really subdued and if not put on hold, because by virtue of the fact, as I said earlier, I mean, Roland, if you look at if you look at the young people today, what would one say in terms of our independence with the behavior of the young people today? Is it reflective of the struggle that the forebears were fighting for? Is it reflective of the things that we know that we are entitled to have?
Okay, but in all this, we have to put things into perspective. And let's start. Prior to independence, the forebears, our forefathers who started the whole struggle, had to put that or undertake that in a certain context, because the landmass and the territories were occupied by various colonialists, and so looking for a certain struggle to be free was situated in a certain context. Do you think, if you look at what pre-independence situations were, whether geopolitical or socio-economic and political were, we can draw some synergy or some similarities with what is pervasive currently?
Well, I would say, yeah, to some degree, because when you look at the pre-independence and you look at the colonial powers, how they had embedded themselves in formerly the Gold Coast. I mean, when you look at what the former colonial powers were doing, even when you look at the Berlin Conference, the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885, most of our people today seem like they're oblivious. And many of the problems that we are having today are predicated upon that cryptic strategy that the Europeans did in 1884 and 1885 by partitioning Africa as they've done today. And so it makes it almost impossible for us to realize the dream of our forebears when we are so divided by these artificial borders. I mean, example, I don't have to tell you. I mean, you go to right there at the border on Togo In Ghana, you know, you have a Ghanaian's house, maybe the bedroom could be in Togo, the living room or sitting room could be in Ghana. But the point, yeah, but the point, and it's like that throughout Africa. And that in itself, you see what I'm saying? It was a strategy. The Europeans had a strategy. They knew if they could partition Africa, and they even said it. Cecil Rhodes said that we will rule Africa for 1,000 years. You understand what I'm saying? So when they put the Berlin Conference document in place and made it a reality, it virtually, you know what I mean, tied our hands to such a degree that heretofore, I mean, you know, in terms of our future goals and objectives on trying to move forward, virtually would be impossible because it has a tendency where we do not trust each other, sovereign states. You understand what I'm saying? And if we're talking about unity of Africa, that has to be removed. But how are you going to remove that when you have the continent so partitioned and each member is trying to claim their sovereignty? You're either a francophone, anglophone, then the one speaking Portuguese, one speaking Arabic,
or Spanish,
or Spanish. Now, you know,
somewhere.
And so I think the whole thing is, if we're going to correct this error, like you were saying earlier, let us go back and put under the magnifying glass what were the dynamics of the Europeans when they came down the coast here 500, 600 years ago. You see, those are the things you got to really go into that to know what were their aims and objectives. Because when you look at, like say for Ghana, you start the whole West African coast. I mean, if you look at the slave forts, Ghana, out of all of the slave forts that existed during the peak of the Atlantic slave trade, there were 66. The Gold Coast, Ghana, had 46 of the 66. Mathematically, that should tell you something right there, politically and mathematically. There were 66 between Senegal all the way down to Angola. The Europeans had classified that area as the slave coast. You know what I mean? Senegal all the way down to Angola. And they had slave forts built in all the different regions. But it was the Gold Coast that had 46 of the total 66 in this huge area. Now, how does one look at that? It simply means is that they had some aims and objectives for Ghana or the Gold Coast. And I don't believe that Europeans have really, I don't think they have released from their minds. They still want this area, the Gold Coast. And I think this was really a part of their strategy during the 400 to 500 years of the transatlantic slave trade. So the point that I'm trying to get across is that there are still residual effects that are affecting us today of what happened yesterday. And these have come to be impediments that are impeding our progress. So how do we get around that? Ghana at 60. I think Ghana at 60, you know, we have a lot to clap for. Ghana has come a long ways. There's no doubt about it. And as I said at the outset, the rest of Africa, if you do not know it, Africa has a perspective of Ghana as being the lead of the pack. Where Ghana goes, it influences the other African countries. So I would say that Ghana has a great amount of responsibility in terms of leadership role for the rest of continental Africa. You know what I mean? And you know, recently, if you don't know it, in the African Union, it was just nominated or elected a Ghanaian as the deputy chairperson of the African Union. Are you aware of this?
Yes, I am.
The Honorable Ni Kwesi Kwartey, and he is a staunch Pan-Africanist. So I expect really some dynamic changes on the African continent as a result of that.
Okay, so we'll talk about the subject of unity and the whole persona of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who perhaps is the centerpiece of Ghana's independence struggle. But we have correspondents all across the capital and various regions to tell us what the mood is, or the situation or the atmosphere in the various capitals of the various regions. But in Accra, the Independence Square is Maxwell Agbagba. Remember, he put together that great documentary about Ghana's progress 60 years on, and we brought you that documentary. But currently... the Ghana 60 committee that is putting together the whole event, we're told the whole year-long event that has been pegged at 20 million Ghana cedis will enable various libraries to be constructed across selected areas across the country. There was also going to be a mausoleum, a monument or a museum of a sort of former heads of state, etc., etc. But talking about former heads of state, that is where we know that one central figure who is at the Ghana independence story is always Osajefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. At the turn of the century, the last century, there was a poll on the BBC, and he was said to have polled the highest as the most influential African of the century. But do we celebrate him enough in our country? But for those who also helped or complemented his role in the independence struggle, do we celebrate them enough? And that is why we have our own historian, a Pan-Africanist, a lecturer, and we also have him here, Dr. Hamet Maulana, helping us do the discussions. And Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, we have to talk about him. Yeah, there are great things written about him, of course, not known generally by the entire student population of our country because of how short the educational cycle is, etc. But history has great things written about the man, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. First, what do you make of him and his personality?
Well, you know, when you assess Dr. Nkrumah, you know, it's quite controversial. But you can only, whether you're looking at the good or the bad, you can only come out with the positive about him. But, you know, there are some of the things that, let's say as Ghanaians, that we don't understand about Osajefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and how he became what he was. You have to look at the fact that Dr. Nkrumah went abroad. You understand what I'm saying? And see, when you go abroad, especially going to the United States of America, see, it's something that we have a tendency here to overlook, that he was groomed. He was groomed in this controversy of human rights, you know what I mean, and saw the essence of what race meant. He could see the essence of what colonial masters, how they manifested themselves and how they were looking at Africa. So he got in the mix in the U.S., meeting people like, if you will, Malcolm X, you understand what, Dr. Martin Luther King. And of course he came upon the thoughts and opinions and philosophy of Marcus Messiah Garvey. And even as I was telling you before, I mean, this is something that people have a tendency to overlook. And I will read what he said. This is what Dr. Nkrumah said. He said, long before many of us were even conscious of our degradation, Marcus Garvey fought for African national and racial equality. I think that of all the literature I studied, the book that did more than any other to fire my enthusiasm was the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey. And so we have to understand, was it just by happenstance that the Black Star Line, you know what I mean, was created? These were things that Marcus Garvey had manifested, you know what I mean, 20 or 30 years before Nkrumah even went to America. And then you're talking about the African personality. You understand what I'm saying? These were things that Garvey. So Garvey had a tremendous influence, his opinions, philosophy, and thoughts upon Dr. Nkrumah. And then the integration of Dr. Nkrumah amongst Africans of the diaspora, particularly African Americans. And it was a very critical time because African Americans at that particular time in the 40s, late 30s and the 40s and going into the 50s, they were fighting for human rights. And they were standing up against the most powerful nation in the world. And Nkrumah, he was taken aback from that. That you mean that you could challenge the most powerful nation in the world and make them listen to what you have to say? So I'm saying that to say, when he landed in Ghana, when he came home, the perspective view was that, you know, he would join the pack on how one had traditionally dealt with the colonial powers. I'm talking about, you know, Dankwa and some of the other big six.
The background text.
Yeah, but in Nkrumah, one has to understand that he had been groomed in controversy. He had been groomed among
almost like became a maverick.
Yeah, absolutely. So when he
Due
landed
to his experiences in the U.S. and what he's read,
absolutely,
and what he was exposed to.
And I'm telling you, and you have to understand that this was most profound. That you could take a people that could challenge the most powerful nation in the world that had no fear. Now, to Nkrumah, coming from the Gold Coast at the time, this was unheard of. You know, I mean, to talk about Britain challenging Britain, but to challenge a nuclear power of the United States, and he saw that African Americans did that. And so what that did, that emboldened him much deeper in his will to make sure that Ghana got independence. You know what I mean? Immediately. So when he came back, and then, of course, he went on to England. And I think he spent at least about 2 or 3 years in England before he came back. And he met up with giants, Pan-African giants like C.R.L. James. He met up with George Patmore. You understand what I'm saying? These were people who had been out there for decades. And as a result of that, when Nkrumah came back to the Gold Coast, Ghana, he knew he was well focused on what he wanted and what he wanted for Ghana. And he was well focused to know that the British, he was not going to wait for them to give Ghanaians independence. That's why you see, you know, independence now. And his whole manifestation of moving forward to liberate the Gold Coast, the Ghanaians from Britain, it was, I mean, he did it with, how can I say that? I mean, he did it with unequivocal thought. He went straight into it, and he didn't have no fear.
Because he thought that was the right thing to do. It was non-negotiable.
Because he had seen, this is what I'm saying, he had seen earlier people who had challenged the most powerful nation in the world. And you know, you have to understand that Britain was the mother of America. And if he saw Africans in America that could challenge America as they did and make America listen, why can't you challenge Britain? And so when he came back, and then the Ghanaians on the ground here, you understand what the traditional way of doing things, they couldn't understand this. They could not understand this. But so this is where you look at Nkrumah, and you have to assess him that he stands way out in front of the pack, you understand, of the regulars. And it was predicated upon the experiences that he had received while he had traveled abroad in America and in England. So he was well groomed. He had a vision. He knew exactly who he was and where he was going when he came back to Ghana.
Well, so we have to put all those into perspective. And next we'll be talking about...
Joy News wishes all viewers happy Independence Day.
Talking about Kwame Nkrumah, there are. And there are many countries in Africa who seem to hold him in high esteem, of course, not something that we tend to do for our heroes, so to speak. But at the end of the day, after all the struggle and him, well, culminating in independence for the Republic of Ghana, there was a certain penchant for the Ghanaian to feel that the black man in Africa could liberate him or herself from the shackles of colonialism. And it was something that spread across. And that was profound.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, Nkrumah, he propagated that with the whole emphasis on bringing Ghana's independence. You know what I mean? I mean, you know, this axiom that he said that Ghana's independence is meaningless unless it is linked to the total independence of the African continent. So Nkrumah was not just satisfied on seeing Ghana independent. He wanted to spread this fever throughout the whole of Black Africa. And of course, I think within, after Ghana got her independence by 1960, there were close to about, I don't know, 20 African countries that had become liberated. So Nkrumah, he had a universal perspective of what he saw the black man needed to do. As he said, the black man is capable of minding his own affairs. And that is to say that he wanted to see Africans wake up all over the continent. You have to realize also, Roland, that the colonial powers had an agenda of superiority, was to relegate the African to a status of total ignorance. I mean, in the Congo, with Leopold, it's quite obvious. And so you had a situation at the time that Ghana got her independence where many Africans believed that the white man was God, that he was invincible, that he was not, he was not human. And so what do you do when you got this kind of mindset with African people believing, and of course the colonials had manifested that type character and manifested that type policy to make their subjects feel that they were gods and they were beyond reproach, that you could not even reach them. So what do you do with a people that are in ignorance as such, believing that the white man is God? And Nkrumah had to establish a policy to break that myth. You know what I mean? And that is to say that the black man is capable of minding his own affairs. And he had to use as a yardstick of measurement Ghana. And that was extremely important for us to understand, that he was using Ghana as the model, that if Ghana worked, it could be a beacon of hope for all of the African countries. And this is exactly where he was going. And of course, as he say, imperialist or colonial powers, they saw that. And this was considered to be, you know, dangerous, because they still wanted to hold on to their mineral wealth in many of these African countries. But what I can say about Nkrumah was simply this. He has such a profound awakening that his perspective of independence was not domesticated. You know what I mean? He was talking about the whole continent of Africa, and he was talking about the global African world. Nkrumah's philosophy and thoughts went beyond the African continent. Are you aware of this? Nkrumah woke up Africans in the diaspora and put them on a path, you know what I mean, to say that, you know, your citizenship is meaningless in these countries if you don't have land of your own. You have to have land of your own. If you
don't have control of yourself.
Yeah, you have to have land of your own and control it. And so this particular perspective view began to permeate the minds of many Africans in the diaspora, that they needed land to develop for independence. That came from Ghana. And Nkrumah was pushing all of these particular philosophies. So Nkrumah, when you really assess him, you know, his philosophy was way beyond Ghana. As he said, Ghana's independence is meaningless unless it's linked with the total independence of the African continent. Now, I mean, that says it in itself. Does it not? It says it in itself, that if Ghana's independence is meaningless unless it's linked to the total independence of the African continent. It meant that Ghana, sitting alone as an island, got her independence, but she would be subjective to all of the European countries, that they could finish Ghana within a matter of seconds.
But would you say that for many of the countries that, of course, like Ghana, that follow suit to gain independence, were they prepared for the exigencies of the times post the leaving of the colonialists, so to speak, looking at how they've performed from the time of their independence till now?
Well, I'm not getting your point.
Okay. Would you say, looking at the perspective of the history of Ghana and the rest of the countries that gained independence at the time that we did and following after, that they were ready to confront the challenges that their countries would face when the colonialists left?
Roland, that's a very good question, because history, I think, it proves itself that many of the African countries were not prepared. And you see, there was something very, very fundamental, and I just said it a moment ago, I think. Even though the countries got their independence, it was more political. You understand what I'm saying? They did not get the independence economical. And so coming back to what you and I were talking about earlier, the Berlin Conference, do we not understand, and many of our people do not understand today on the African continent, that much of the confusion, much of the disunity that we have is predicated upon these artificial borders. And so, to answer your question, you know, following Ghana's independence, the other countries that followed, they got their independence, but then again, how would they toe the line? In other words, economically, when most of the infrastructure that they had in their country was attached to the colonial mother country back in Europe. Look what France did to Guinea. When Guinea wanted to really develop Guinea and said she did not need France to do it, what France said? France said, okay, if you want to do that and you do not want us to help you, we will take everything out that we put. The French went and they dug up even the railway lines. They dug up the railway lines to take it back to France. All of the infrastructure that they supposedly were responsible for, that Guinea now says she wanted to do herself, France took all of this back. So to answer your question, I would say that, you know, everything comes in a gradual state. The country, it was happening so fast, you know what I mean, the independence, that many of the African countries did not have a chance to really look deep into the struggle of what it would take to forge ahead independently from the colonial powers, not realizing how deep these colonial powers had gotten inside their countries. And they were deep. Language.
Yep.
Language, for example, you know what I mean? it was the colonial powers had embedded their language in there. And as I said a moment ago, the Berlin Conference, you know what I mean? Artificial borders. And then you had, there was a paradigm shift in our state of being, in our livelihood, in our market economy. The market economy that we had before these people came here, you know what I mean? They destroyed that. And they linked us to their economy. So therefore, when we got independence, everything that we would need to forge ahead.
And since then, we've been struggling all this while. The democracy that we say we were or are adopting from the North, from the West, we still haven't been able to consolidate. Our own people have been more like a disincentive to the growth of their own countries, would you need to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't say that that is not the case. I mean, you know, it's been a serious.
You just have to go to the countries that have civil wars and the various conflict-ridden countries on the continent to get to know that the black man and the African himself or herself is an inimical species to his own people.
Yeah, but I would say, well, Roland, to be fair about that, in order to be fair about that, Roland, I think we have to bring in the European power that colonized the country.
Well, we do understand because of their interests and the interests they have.
Yeah, because in other words, look at France today. I mean, we're in the 21st century. France still has not accepted the principle to let go
of its colonies.
Yes. You understand what I'm saying? So even though
still has great influence.
Yeah, absolutely. And causing coups d'etats, you understand what I'm saying? Disrupting the governments, causing the fall of their currency. These are things that Africans were not sophisticated enough to understand about the European and how he was dealing. And so many of the problems that we're having today on the African continent are coming as a result of not understanding the dynamics of how European nations deal, and not understanding that they never did accept the principle of giving independence, if you will, to these African countries. Because remember, Europe herself, you know, when you talk about natural resources, look at Britain. What natural resources does Britain have? You know what I mean? Everything that Britain, they say the sun never set on the British Empire. All of the resources that Britain supposedly have, they were located in all these countries around the world. So when she started losing her colonies, Britain began to shrink quickly. And of course, you know that European countries are aware of that. If they're going to give, if they have to let go of African countries that's considered to be rich in mineral resources, et cetera, they will find a way in what they have done to still link themselves to that. And that's why I say Africans fell. They did not know the dynamics of how European, and even today, and I must say even as we talk today, Africans do not understand the dynamics of how Europeans think. Okay. They think the Europeans think like Africans. And I would tell you in my experience, there's a distinct difference between how the African think and the European think.
But for all the thinking that we have about Pan-Africanism and how perhaps the incursions have been made by the European and the European powers, etc., we have countries in Africa today that really have not only, have perhaps been less dominated by the Europeans, unlike how they've been dominated by the Arabs and the Middle Easterns and the Asians, etc. And so you find a certain vicious cycle of what was existing pre-independence period for many African countries being a perpetuation and the massive corruption of their natural resources into other countries, leading to great flight and poverty.
Well, Roland, I think no one in their right mind could argue against that. That what you're saying in essence, since independence, many African countries have made a mess in terms of governance, you know, and development. I mean, if we look at the situation just recently But we will get to, if you look at the situation recently in the Gambia, you know, with Yahya Jammeh, you understand what I'm saying? I mean, it said that he would rule the Gambia for 1,000 years. You understand what I'm saying?
He's an African himself. He's oppressing his own people.
Yes, but I think we need to put this in its proper perspective.
You're saying that he's being influenced by the white man?
No, I wouldn't say,
European.
no, I can't say that his day-to-day behavior is being influenced. I don't think we're on there, yeah.
We are.
No, what they're showing.
We are.
Yeah. What I'm saying, I don't think that we can assert that the Africans' day-to-day behavior is being influenced by the European per se. Now, but what you have to understand, look at this. Ghana is an exporter of gold, but yet, you understand what I'm saying? You take the city outside of Ghana, it is worthless.
Okay, so we are bringing to you live pictures from the Independence Square in Accra, where the march past or the route march for the various security services has started in earnest. It's the main ceremony to mark 60 years of Ghana's independence. And for many of you who want to have a better perspective as to what the main ceremonies are, you just have to tune into local TV. The best will be on this channel, the Joy News channel. And on the AM show, we're bringing to you a perspective from the Independence Square. Maxwell Agbagba on ground, Latif Idris also following the president and giving to us what really the itinerary of the presidential team is and what they intend to do to mark the day fully. But you can get interactive on Facebook, Join Us on TV. It's where we're streaming live. We also have interactive pages all along in our channel on YouTube, My Joy Online TV, and we have a handle on Twitter. Join Us on TV. As you do all that, please know that these are live pictures from the Independence Square in Accra. It is where we have the march past by the various security agencies which have convened or converged there as part of the main ceremony for 60th independence celebration for Ghana. And a committee has been put together. That committee has a budget of some 20 million Ghana cedis to do a number of things, including the construction of about 60 libraries in selected areas across the country, and also put together a mausoleum for the Republic of Ghana. And that museum, so to speak, not a mausoleum, the museum is going to have the history of all our past presidents as well as heads of state, and also give us a certain perspective as to what the history of our republic is. And so those live pictures coming to us from the Independence Square, and Maxwell Agbagba and his team are making sure that we also have great coverage brought to you. Just in case you want to tell us something, a word or two, or you've seen something of commendation you would want to mention, please log on to our Facebook page, Join Us on TV. We'll be grateful to have your views. But we have Dr. Hamet Maulana still with us, and we keep having all these ceremonies and all throughout the years. But essentially, what should we be doing to represent the independence that we have?
Well, if I may, I would like to address the statement that you made a moment ago, because I think it needs to be qualified.
Okay.
And that was in the sense that what you're saying in essence, since independence, Africans have virtually, many of the African nations have not done a good job, you know, in managing their own affairs.
Particularly
well.
Yeah, very well.
But I come back, let us use Mother Ghana. And Ghana can be used as a yardstick of measurement. And Ghana has a record that is impeccable in terms of good governance, etc. But look, we export gold. Do we set the gold prices in the world? We export cocoa. You understand what I'm saying? Do we set the cocoa prices internationally? I mean, we can go on and on. Many of the natural resources throughout the whole of Africa, you understand what I'm saying? They are controlled and governed by a consortium of European nations. So it goes to tell you, Roland, you have to understand that he who pays the piper is the one that calls the tune. In other words, you may have good ideas. And Nkrumah was a victim of the very point that I'm making right now. Nkrumah was a victim of that at one particular time, meaning that the cocoa prices artificially had been artificiated and falling. And you know, when you got your whole nation based on exportation of cocoa, and all of a sudden the buyers drop the prices, It's going to be internal problems.
Hamet Maulana is still with me. And if we want to put a better perspective on the way we mark independence, how memorable can it be?
The question is, if we want to do that now?
Yes, in terms of if we want to make it memorable. For example, this year, we want to build a cathedral to make it interdenominational and do something more representative to signify 60 years of independence. How representative can it be if we want to put together an independence anniversary event, so to speak?
Well, you know, I tell you, Roland, my perspective view of that is that you need to address the most important issues that affect the youth in this nation, and it is education. I think that money should be put into the educational system to revamp it. I think that would be a memorable and a sustainable, effective thing for Ghana at 60, that we're going to make a paradigm shift to say in the next 15 years, since we have oil, we want to have 15,000 petroleum engineers. You know, we're going to meet that goal to get that number. In the next 10 to 15 years, we want to bring the Ghana educational system up to par, where every Ghanaian child would know the history, the true history of this nation. You understand what I'm saying? And would have a perspective view of how to go out and integrate him or herself into the world. These are things that are lacking. You look at our children today, they're meek. You know, it's like they can't even go out into the world. And everyone, it seems like the outlet that we have today is to go into football academy, the mentor program. Everybody can't go there. Education. If we're going to have a memorable thing for Ghana at 60, I think we should have a paradigm shift of the revamping of our educational system. And it should become more African-centered. African-centered. No nation. You know, what do you say? The creativity of the human mind is linked to the knowledge of oneself. Creativity of the human mind is linked to the knowledge of oneself. And we find our children today, even though they have their certificate, they have no creativity of the mind. Only thing is cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste. Can create nothing. And I'm telling you, creativity of the mind is linked to the knowledge of self. And if we don't address and correct that deficit, I think what we're going to do is continue to be going around in circles. We would have Ghana at 70. You'll be asking the same question. Ghana at 80. So we have to have a paradigm shift in our educational system. It must become much more African-centered. In other words, the best way that I can tell you that we should institute an educational format is the Ghananization of education. The Ghananization of Ghanaians' mind, body, spirit, and soul. And I'm not trying to be facetious on that. China did the same thing, Chinanization. And China was in a very low position internationally going back about 50 years ago until they revamped their educational system, their cultural system, and they instituted a program called the Chinanization of the Chinese mind, body, spirit, and soul. We need to have the Ghananization of the Ghanaians' mind, body, spirit, and soul. What good is it for us to be dealing with trying to address international issues when we have our home base is very thin from an educational point of view? That we have our youth that don't know their left from their right. You understand what I'm saying? And it's really an indictment. When you go amongst the youth and you ask them what does he want to be or what does she wants to be, and they tell you that I would like to go to football academy, I would like to go to the mentorship program. I mean, these are things, man, that no nation can be built on strong principles without an educational foundation that is sound, that addresses the needs of the youth.
Well, we're still bringing to you live pictures from the Independence Square in Accra, and it is the Speaker who is now taking his position because he has just come in walking on the red carpet to his seat, and Professor Michael Quay will be ushered in very soon. But now on the other side of the Independence Square is the sword cutting ceremony, and I believe this is the climax of the event after the president cut the sword for the National Interdenominational Cathedral to be built. And it's all part of the programming for Ghana 60, and we know that a committee has been put together, and that committee is overseeing the celebration, the main event we're seeing today, even what we're already covering for you, and also the other events that would be in for the rest of the year. It's a year-long event, we're told. So we have to wrap up on our discussions. If there's a lasting legacy that Ghana has on the continent, Kwame Nkrumah has on the continent, what will be that legacy?
Well, if there's a lasting legacy that Kwame Nkrumah had left on the continent, well, I think it would be to say that the black man is capable of managing his own affairs, and that the education in the context of an African-centered educational curriculum. And I think this is what Osajefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, was leading toward. You see, let me just say this briefly. Roland, I mean, if we talk about celebrating, does it not sadden you when you turn on your news report and you see 3,000 Africans drowning in the Mediterranean Sea who are leaving the shores of Libya trying to get to Europe, and the European nations there has told them, we don't want you here, but they say, crook or hook, we will go across to get there. Does it, I mean, that is an indictment of the whole African leadership that something is wrong. Or you look on the news and you see that whoever African that did make it lands on the shores there and kisses the ground and say, thank God that I made it to Europe. Look, these are things, man, we should not take lightly. We got problems at home. And the problems that we have at home is, I think, is a matter of derelict and neglect, that we have put our priorities in the wrong place. And as I said before to you, if it's a legacy that I believe should be credited to Dr. Nkrumah, he put all of his apples into education. I mean, look what he did, education. I mean, look at the number of schools within a short period of time that this man created in Ghana. Look, the northern region. I mean, I was up at I did the 100th anniversary with Samia Nkrumah in 2010. You understand what I'm saying? I was shocked to know that the people considered this man to be God up there, because they said, why? He brought us education where nobody else has ever thought about us. So if I were to champion the legacy of Nkrumah's ideals and philosophy, I would say that the black man is capable of minding his own affairs, but predicated upon an African-centered educational foundational base. And that's what Nkrumah came to do, and he was on the road to doing it. And if he had succeeded, I would tell you, my brother, we would not be here today pondering the thought of what is the way forward. We would be a beacon of hope for the whole of Africa and the global African community. But as it stands right now, you know, it's just like we don't know exactly what tomorrow is going to bring. And another thing, we have lost confidence in ourselves. We feel that we cannot go forward unless we bring a European expatriate in to tell us what to do. And when we got qualified people here, Ghanaians and Africans in general, that are capable of doing technical work, but because of that colonial education, yes, that we feel, in other words, we don't have confidence in self. So Roland, if you don't have confidence in yourself, and then again, let's go over to the economic development aspect that I told you. How can you possibly talk about forging ahead as a unilateral, independent nation when you do not have control of your natural resources? You do not have control of pricing your mineral resources. You are working your fingers to your bone to get the cocoa, the gold, and everything out. But then somebody else comes along and says, well, the price is going this year, 1,000 pounds sterling. You know what I mean? You have no say-so whatsoever. So how can you develop a country when you do not control your natural resources? Maybe I have it all wrong. Can you tell me, how can you develop a country or a nation?
Not possible.
Well, that should be.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much. And already we have the dignitaries coming to take their seats. We have to wrap up with Dr. Hamet Maulana. And thanks for joining me this morning. It's been a pleasure having you. And we hope that you'll have a nice ceremony today.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
It's been my pleasure being here.
And it's good to be a Ghanaian, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yes. It's tremendous.
Tremendous. All right. So we now would have to continue with the regular programming where we take you to the Independence Square and have a better perspective on many of the issues. But we'll take a break. We'll be right back.
Joy News wishes all viewers happy Independence Day.